Hey, this is a call about bring your own key implementation for GitLab dedicated. Hussein, thanks for working on this. You want to talk about what you did?
Sure. I couldn't go ahead with my initial plan of using the instrumenter to deploy the dedicated environment and use the customer managed key. So I fall back to your initial suggestion for using Omnibus and an external RDS to implement and verify that. So first of all, we deployed it. It's completely feasible. In terms of the key revocation and reinstating access to the key, I tested with EBS and RDS and tried to find out how the key revocation impacts the access to the data. We may need to implement a specific shutdown request after the key is revoked. So we may need a constant job to monitor access to the key, which I have a script for that, and we can reuse it.
Yeah, it's like Amazon automatically retains the key and you kind of need to keep rechecking that. That makes sense.
Yes, yeah. We need to do that probably because, for example, for EBS, we cannot restart the instance. Even restarting the instance, to my surprise, really doesn't revoke the access. The data is still accessible, even though the key is revoked. But we need to unmount the volume, and any further attempt to reattach the volume, detach the volume and reattaching the volume, not mounting, detaching, will fail, of course. But for RDS, what we need to do, I realized later that we need to shut down all the connections. So the application needs to come down. So RDS puts the instance into a terminal mode. I haven't tested S3 yet. I should do that. And then we later discussed this with Josh about backup and restore. That's a bit of a gray area, hazy area for me, because my understanding is that the keys, customer managed keys, are pretty much zone specific. They are region specific. I cannot access them across different regions. So I need to investigate that part, which comes later. So that's the summary of it. Feasible. We need some follow-up on this. Probably the solution will have two parts. One lands into instrumenter for provisioning and onboarding and provisioning, and the other part is a constant background job that runs in AMP. That's the initial assessment. I tried to summarize it. So if you want to discuss it further and you have any questions, I will try to answer it based on to the extent of my knowledge at the moment, because I start getting more information as I go ahead with the different aspects of this. We also wrote up some action plan for the next steps, which I think Joshua can explain that even further.
Cool. Thanks for that. Sounds really good. All makes sense. I propose that you start adding to the dedicated docs. So for dedicated, start making page, put like draft on the top, but start putting these lessons, finding one, finding two. Don't write them down as findings, but just say like, hey, we know that if a customer revokes a key, we need to do this and this and that to actually have it revoked.
Yep. Yeah, I guess the best spot probably for that is the blueprint itself, or even the document in the architecture. I will try to locate a right place. Consulting dedicated team first. They have their own structure.
Yeah. Anything that takes a merge request.
Yeah.
I don't want it in Epics or in Google Docs or something like that. Cool. Makes sense. By the way, I learned that if a customer updates the keys, that will cause new data to be written with the new key, but Amazon cannot like convert from one key to another. So for example, as a customer, I can just get a new key every year And then after 8 years, when I don't need to retain, I can pull the old key and some of the attachments or something will be gone. But that's about what Amazon can do. You can't like
Okay.
convert an S3 bucket to an updated key or something.
Okay, that makes key rotation is a bit tricky, right?
I will put key rotation out of scope.
Yeah.
Explicitly.
Good to know.
So good thing to add to that doc page, like key rotation.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, on that note, I think we can dive into it. I think key rotation happens automatically because it's like a best practice in every year. But I think what happens is it doesn't delete the old keys that hang around until you like revoke them, and so it starts to encrypt with the new keys by default. I think we have this currently set up with how dedicated runs today with the encryption keys.
Yep.
But I agree. Like we can worry about key rotation later. I think
I would call it key updating is inside a scope, but key rotation, well, I'll maybe phrase it as we do key updating where you can add a new key.
Mhm.
I have a question about when you change the key for RDS, you have to change, you just change the parameters in the RDS config. We don't have to change anything with our config, because I know with S3, we can specify which ARN, which key to basically use. And that actually goes in the GitLab config. But I'm wondering if it's the same thing with S3. We could make it just default to whatever we want the actual key to be, but then we don't have to touch the GitLab config. Or do we have to actually, when we want to update a key on S3, are we going to have to change two places, I guess?
No, for RDS, we don't need to pass it as a configuration to instance. It goes into the configuration of the RDS itself. So in terms of if we in instrument and terminology, we don't it doesn't get past provision point.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's opaque to like the Postgres client, right? But S3 is a little bit different because S3 is actually AWS's own service, and they have the ability to say, "Hey, I want to use a different key here."
The reason that I don't know that because I haven't tested S3 yesterday, I only tested with EBS and RDS so far. So S3 and backup and restore are the next action items for me at the moment.
Okay, I'm just getting ahead of you then. Thanks.
Thank you. But thanks for the pointers.
And just real quick here on that, here's the documentation of how EBS handles rotation of keys. So it's as discussed, where basically generates new cryptographic material every year by default, and it saves all old versions, so you can still decrypt. But then going forward, any new content is using the new keys, but it doesn't delete the old key material, so you can still decrypt content. And that's in general how they approach the problem.
Cool, makes sense.
Other questions on all the work Hussein has done? If not, we can walk a little bit through the epics perhaps, or the epic and the issues.
Sure.
Not that there's too much in there. Yeah, if you pull up epic 79 listed, I can just share my
Maybe
screen.
you can screen share if that's okay.
Yeah. So in general, we have a whole bunch of stuff written on here. We also have some other links to some other competitive solutions, not necessarily competitive, but Databricks, Snowflakes, MongoDB, Slack. They're all a little bit different, but you can read through those. But yeah, so in general, we wanted the first step be prototyping. This is where we are right now, to be clear. And so we wanted to kind of validate deployment. So we did using Omnibus. We're working through EBS and RDS. We still have S3 to go through and do. We'll then tackle backup and restore as the current plan, because that is an area of risk we wanted to try and work through. And that I think if we can have a confident solution for backup and restore, that would give confidence to landing this in February. Or potentially sooner. And so like the earlier we know kind of where the big problems lie, that would be good. And then from there, try and get deployment using Instrumenter going. We have a WIP MR from Anonymity that implements, I think sounds like close to it from instance testing. And then we get into key revocation detection, key rotation, and just a general testing of those areas. And then from there, we can refine the blueprint / solution design and get that reviewed now that we have more information on how this all works. And then we start getting into implementation for new tenants. We work on that key, revocation detection and shutdown. And then we work on migration of keys. That's kind of the general, or migration of tenants. That's kind of the general thought of how we're going to try and approach the work.
And I would place existing tenants out of scope for now.
Yeah, we can ship to new once we get through probably phase 4 here. And we can probably don't need to go for like the complete A+ on phase 4. I think this is still saying you know more here, but it feels like an area we can actually iterate because it doesn't actually change how the deployment is deployed. It's more about detecting and shutting things down than so it's not like a breaking change with a big migration if we have to iterate here.
Yeah, that falls into a different part of the solution. So if we consider that it has 2 components, it is the second component that we are working on. I do not anticipate any breaking change into instrumental, let's say.
Cool. I tried to Google GitLab Instrumenter, didn't find anything. What is that?
That's the platform that is the solution that runs underneath and dedicated users to onboard and provision and configure the dedicated instance. So
I hope that was Switchboard.
Switchboard is the front end for it. So underneath it uses Instrumenter.
Is this like an Ansible playbook?
Yeah, so it's sorry, go ahead, Hussein. You know this more than I do.
I'm sorry. No, actually, I am still just learning because this is just too big. But yeah, it uses get underneath, and it is another layer on top of get, which provisions resources and prepares the environment so that the get can be invoked against the environment. So it is, let's say, a series of Terraform and get Ansible playbooks. And more. For environment,
I understand everything you said, but I'm just more confused.
Yeah, so I think you have Switchboard, which is the UI and the state store eventually for all the config, and then you have AMP, which is like the control plane, which can coordinate jobs and run deploys and things like that. But then the actual thing that does the deploy and interacts with get and does all and does some account creation is Instrumenter. So it's like you have that's my understanding.
Actually, I have there is a diagram which always helps me to understand this better. I'm trying to locate it and bring it up. Shows the relationship between these different components, and I think it is right. Oh yeah, if I could share my screen. So. So Instrumenter is preparing the Docker images, is published as Docker images, which AMP, which controls the tenant environment, uses. So the whole runbooks of different stages of preparing and setting up a dedicated environment is implemented in Instrumenter, published to a container registry, and is picked up by AMP and is applied to the tenant environment. And Switchboard is kind of like a user interface to
How can Switchboard only talk to Instrumenter via the container registry? That doesn't make sense to me.
That part I I don't know. I haven't really gone because I never use switchboard. I always go through instrumenter to amp and directly to the environment. And even sometimes I skip amp most
So
of the time.
So I think AMP is how it's going to kick things off, right? So I guess what you're to maybe play back what you're saying, Hussein, is, and really more people from the dedicated team, but like
Is
Instrumenter is like
kind of like what we use to make an omnibus image, but in this case, it's a container image?
It is literally infrastructure as code. Not exactly omnibus, but it is all the runbooks that are required for preparing an environment from zero, an
Okay.
AWS environment
Is
from
it
zero to
customer
functional.
specific, the containers that it creates, or do you use-
No.
Okay, then I get it. Okay, cool. That's super helpful. Thank you. Thanks so much. Ton of progress, Hussein, for the few days you had over Thanksgiving. So appreciate it. Really good. Keep it up.
Thank you so